The scent of lemon polish and old paper is the smell of my life. It's a scent I've cultivated over 40 years in this house, in this very study. It's the aroma of order, of hard work, of things carefully built and meticulously maintained. This room with its floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelves, the green banker's lamp casting a warm pool of light on the leather-bound blotter, the framed photographs of my children and grandchildren smiling from happier times. This is my sanctuary. It is the physical manifestation of everything I've ever striven for. And today, that scent feels tainted. I run a hand, speckled with age and traced with raised blue veins, over the smooth, cool surface of the mahogany desk. My father was a carpenter. He taught me that the true value of something isn't its price tag, but the integrity of its joints, the honesty of its grain, the sweat and time invested in its creation. This desk was the first significant purchase I made after the business finally turned a consistent profit. Eleanor, my late wife, thought it was an extravagance. Arthur, she'd said, her voice full of that practical warmth I miss every day. A door on 2 filing cabinets would do the same job. But I insisted. I wanted a foundation, something solid, something that would last. That's all I've ever wanted to build, something that would last. Not just a business, not just a bank account, but a family, a legacy. I believed, with the unshakable faith of a younger man, that the two were inextricably linked, that the former would secure and honor the latter. I see now at 72 that I was only half right. The foundation I built is solid, but the family I hoped would live within its walls has a crack running right through its core. And the architect of that crack is my own grandson. His name is Jake, just 24 years old, with his whole life ahead of him, a life I've already subsidized more than he deserves. The memory of him is a splinter in my heart, a constant, low-grade ache. I look at the photograph on the corner of my desk, the one from his high school graduation. He's got his arm around me, his grin wide and infectious, my own smile proud, if a little weary. He had that charm, that easy charisma that made you want to believe in him. I did believe in him. I saw the potential, the sharp mind that was just too lazy to apply itself. I thought, with enough guidance, enough support, he'd find his way. I was a fool.
The betrayal didn't arrive with a bang. It didn't start with the phone call from the bank. That was merely the culmination, the final, irrefutable proof. It started years ago, with small things. A $50 bill forgotten to be paid back after mowing the lawn. A lawn he'd only half finished. A semester of community college I paid for in full, only for him to drop out after 6 weeks because it was suffocating his creativity. The constant, wheedling requests that always began with, "Grandpa, you know I'm good for it." The car repairs, the insurance payments, the emergency cash to cover a reckless bet. Each time I relented, not because I'm a pushover, but because of the look in my daughter Sarah's eyes. The desperate hope that this time he'd turn a corner. She's a good woman, Sarah. She raised him alone after her husband decided fatherhood was less appealing than a midlife crisis in a convertible. I thought I was helping her. I thought I was being a good grandfather. But there's a fine line between support and enabling. I crossed it. I fed the very sense of entitlement that now threatens us all. I remember the last loan. It was for $2,000. He needed it for a certification course, he said, a sure thing to get him into a sales job with a high ceiling. He came to this very study, full of earnest energy. He'd even worn a college shirt.
"Grandpa, this is it," he'd said. his eyes wide with a sincerity I now recognize as expertly practiced. "This is the break I need. I just need a little help with the upfront cost. I'll pay you back the second I get my first commission check." I looked at him, this boy who shared my blood, and I wanted so badly to believe him. The room was quiet, save for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I could feel the weight of my years, the cumulative fatigue of a lifetime of decisions. What was $2,000 against the chance, however slim, that it might finally set him on the right path? "Jake," I'd said, my voice low and serious, "this is the last time. I'm not an ATM. This family is built on trust. Do you understand?" He nodded vigorously, his face a mask of gratitude. "I understand, Grandpa. I won't let you down. Family means everything." I wrote the check. The ink from my pen was a physical manifestation of my hope. I watched him fold it carefully, tuck it into his wallet as if it were a sacred text. He hugged me, and for a moment I felt the ghost of the little boy who used to build blanket forts in my living room. That was 8 months ago. I never saw the money. When I gently brought it up a few months later, his demeanor changed instantly. The charm evaporated, replaced by a defensive, sullen anger. "God, Grandpa, I said I'd pay you back. You don't have to guilt-trip me. The market's just tough right now. You don't understand how it is for my generation." The shift was chilling. It was the first time I saw a glimpse of the calculating man beneath the boyish facade. The splinter in my heart twisted deeper. But I said nothing more to him. I didn't want to cause a rift. I told myself it was just money. I was wrong. It was never about the money. The real beginning of the end was a Tuesday afternoon. Jake had shown up unannounced, which was his habit. He'd found me in the study, staring at a pile of old financial statements I needed to sort through for tax season.
"Whoa, Grandpa, this place is a mess," he'd said, grinning as he leaned against the doorframe. "Need a hand? I'm free all afternoon." I was tired. My back ached from bending over. The sheer volume of paper was daunting. The offer felt like a blessing. Perhaps, I thought naively, this was his way of making amends, a gesture of goodwill. "That's actually very kind of you, Jake," I said. "I could use the help. It's just sorting. Statements in this pile, receipts in that one." He set to work with an uncharacteristic diligence. For the first hour, we worked in companionable silence. He asked a few questions about the business, about investments, and I found myself falling into the old role of mentor, pleased by his apparent interest. It felt good. It felt like the connection I'd been missing. Then my phone rang. It was my golf partner, Phil, and it was about our tea time for the weekend. I took the call and stepped out into the garden for a few minutes of fresh air, leaving Jake alone in the study. It was a simple, unthinking act of trust, a trust he had already begun to systematically dismantle. When I returned, he was exactly where I'd left him, sorting moneybers. He looked up and smiled. "All sorted, Grandpa. Told you I could help." I thanked him, genuinely touched. We had a glass of iced tea on the porch, and for a little while things felt almost normal. He left with a wave and a promise to come by for Sunday dinner. It was 2 days later that the world shifted on its axis. The phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of my bank. Not the 1-800 number,
but the direct line to my branch manager, a meticulous man named Robert. "Arthur, I'm calling as a precaution. Our security system has flagged several unsuccessful login attempts to your online banking portal over the past 48 hours. The attempts originated from an IP address we don't have on file for you. They failed because the password was incorrect, but the username was right."
The lemon polish scent in the study suddenly seemed cloying. The solidity of the mahogany desk felt like an illusion. My heart, this old, tired muscle, began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "I see," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "What was the username used?" "It was the one on your account, Arthur. A. Henry 72. A coldness seeped into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. A. Henry 72. That wasn't the username I used. That was the username I had written down on a piece of paper, tucked into a folder where I kept all my online login information. A foolish habit for an old man, but one I thought was safe within the walls of my own home. That folder had been in the top drawer of my desk, the same desk Jake had been so diligently helping me clean. I thanked Robert, my mind already racing, a sickening puzzle clicking into place. I instructed him to lock the account completely and to set up a new, heightened security protocol. I told him I'd come in personally to sort it out. After I hung up, I didn't move. I sat in my leather chair, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I looked around the study, at the photographs of my smiling family, and felt a profound, desolate loneliness. I stood up, my joints protesting, and went to the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out the folder. It looked undisturbed. But when I opened it, the careful order of the papers felt slightly off. The login sheet wasn't quite where I remembered leaving it. And then I saw it. A faint smudge on the corner of the paper. A smudge that looked like the print from a cheesy pizza Jake had eaten while he was here. There was no rage, no shouting, just a deep, cavernous sorrow that seemed to swallow all the light from the room. My grandson, my own flesh and blood, hadn't just been lazy or entitled. He had been sneaking through my private papers. He had been trying to steal from me. He hadn't asked for a loan. He had tried to take what he felt he was owed. The trust, the very foundation I had spent a lifetime building, had been dynamited by the person I, in my own foolish way, had tried hardest to protect.
I didn't confront him, not then. Confrontation would have given him a chance to lie, to manipulate, to spin a story that would have put the blame on me for being paranoid or accusatory. It would have forced the family to choose sides, creating a schism that might never heal. No, this required a different approach. This required a lesson. Not a lesson shouted in anger, but one delivered with the cold, quiet precision of a surgeon's scalpel. A lesson about the true cost of betrayal and the ultimate price of greed. I had to make sure my real legacy, the money and assets meant to secure my children's future and provide a springboard for my grateful grandchildren, was protected. The next morning, I went to see my lawyer, Frank O'Donnell. Frank has been my friend for 50 years. He has a face like a wise old hound and a mind as sharp as a razor.
I laid it all out for him in his own, similarly book-lined office. The loans, the dropped semesters, the bank call, the smudge on the paper. Frank listened without interruption, his steepled fingers pressed to his lips. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "Arthur," he said softly, "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, Frank," I replied, my voice hard. "Be thorough. I want to update my will. I want it airtight. I want a clause that specifically disinherits Jake by name and outlines that any challenge to the will results in that challenger's share being voided and distributed among the others." Frank nodded, his eyes grave. "We can do that." "It's harsh, Arthur. Are you sure?" I looked out his window at the city below, a city I had worked in my entire life. He didn't just ask for money, he tried to steal it. He violated my home. He betrayed the one thing that's supposed to be sacred. I'm not being harsh, I'm being just. And so, we began the process. The new will was drafted, a cold, legal document that felt like a betrayal in itself. But it was necessary one, a defensive action. As I signed the papers, the pen felt heavy in my hand, a stark contrast to the hopeful weight I'd felt writing that last check for Jake. This signature wasn't about hope. It was about consequence.
The plan began to form in my mind, fully realized as I drove home from Frank's office. It wouldn't be enough to simply disinherit him in secret. He would never know the cost of his actions. He would only find out after I was gone, and then he would vilify me to the rest of the family, painting himself as the victim of a capricious old man. The poison would linger. No, he needed to understand the consequence. He needed to feel the weight of his betrayal while I was still alive to see it. He needed to be exposed, not by my accusation, but by his own reaction. The stage was set for the following Sunday, family dinner, a tradition Eleanor started 40 years ago, a weekly touchstone of family unity. It was the perfect arena. The cast was all there. My daughter Sarah, Jake's mother, with her perpetually worried eyes. My son Michael, a pragmatic engineer who had little patience for Jake's dramatics. His wife Carol and their 2 daughters, sweet girls who always remembered my birthday. My youngest, Lisa, a free spirit who lived 2 states away but made it a point to call every Sunday, would be there too. And Jake. Jake would be there, hungry for a free meal, no doubt, still believing his secret was safe. The days leading up to the dinner were the longest of my life. I moved through my routine, my morning walk, the newspaper, puttering in the garden, but it was all a pantomime. Inside, I was a coil of tension. I rehearsed the words in my head. I envisioned the scene. I prepared for every possible outcome. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about resetting the balance of the family. This was about teaching a lesson that would echo long after I was dust. The morning of the dinner, I put on a crisp button-down shirt. I looked at myself in the mirror. The face that stared back was old, yes, but the eyes held a resolve I hadn't felt in years. This was for Eleanor. This was for Sarah. This was for the family she deserved to have. This was for the principle that a man's word and his loyalty are the only currencies that truly matter. The house began to fill with the familiar sounds and smells. Sarah was in the kitchen, orchestrating the meal with a nervous energy. The rich aroma of roasting chicken and herbs filled the air. Laughter from my granddaughters echoed from the living room. It was a scene of domestic bliss, a beautiful lie I was about to shatter.
When Jake arrived, he was late, as usual. He sauntered in, gave his mother a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, and nodded at the rest of us.
He smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. He flopped onto the sofa, pulled out his phone, and disappeared into its glowing screen. He didn't look at me. He didn't feel the need to. In his world, I was just the old man, the mark, the source of funds that were his by right of birth. We sat down to eat. The conversation was light, punctuated by the clinking of cutlery against china. I played my part. I asked Michael about work. I complimented Carol on the salad. I listened to my granddaughters talk about school. All the while, I watched Jake. He ate with a hearty appetite, joking with his cousins, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over his head. He was the picture of innocence. The charade was masterful, and it made the cold knot in my stomach tighten. When the apple pie had been reduced to crumbs and the coffee was poured, a comfortable lull fell over the table. This was the moment. This was when families usually talked about their weeks, shared stories, bonded. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the bitter liquid fortifying me. I placed the cup back on its saucer with a deliberate click that seemed louder than it should have been. All eyes turned to me. I cleared my throat. "There's something I need to talk to you all about," I began, my voice calm but carrying. "It's about the future. My future. And yours." The room went still. You could have heard a pin drop. This was it. The point of no return. The silence that followed my opening statement was so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Every face at the table was turned toward me, a gallery of expectant expressions. Sarah's was tinged with her usual anxiety. Michael's was curious and slightly guarded. The girls looked politely interested. And Jake? Jake's eyes had lit up with a naked, hungry curiosity. He leaned forward slightly, his phone forgotten on the table beside his plate. I could almost see the dollar signs reflected in his pupils.
I took a moment, letting the anticipation build. I wanted them to remember this moment, to feel the significance of what was about to be said. I wanted the contrast between their expectations and the reality to be as stark as possible. "As you know," I continued, my gaze sweeping slowly around the table, making brief contact with each of them, "I'm not getting any younger." A polite, slightly uncomfortable chuckle from Carol, "And for the last 40 years, everything I've done, everything I've built has been with you, with this family in mind." I saw Sarah's face soften. She reached over and patted my hand. "Oh, Dad, we know." I gave her a small, grateful smile, but my eyes were hard. It's important to me that what I've worked for is passed on wisely, that it's used as a foundation for your own lives, not a crutch, that it rewards responsibility and loyalty. I let the word loyalty hang in the air. I saw a flicker of something, uncertainty, cross Jake's face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by his mask of eager attention. "So," I said, pausing for effect, "I've decided it's time to make some final decisions regarding my estate plan. I went to see Frank O'Donnell this week." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Estate planning. Wills. These were the unspoken truths of a family with an aging patriarch, topics discussed in hushed tones, but rarely in the open like this. I was dragging the family's financial future into the bright light of the dining room. "I've set up a series of trusts," I said, my voice clear and measured. One for each of my grandchildren. They're designed to be accessed at certain milestones, for a first home, for starting a business, for education, a leg up when it's needed most. I saw the relief and joy on the faces of my son and his wife. Their daughters, understanding the gravity of it, looked both excited and solemn. Sarah was smiling, a tear in her eye. "Oh, Dad, that's wonderful. So generous." And then I turned my gaze to Jake. He was beaming. It was a triumphant, smug smile. He was already spending the money in his head. He saw himself as the primary beneficiary, the favorite grandson who had finally been recognized. The sheer audacity of his self-assurance was breathtaking. I held his gaze. The smile on my own face did not reach my eyes. There is, however, one exception. The words were simple, flat, and they cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a shard of ice. The beam on Jake's face froze, then began to slowly crack. "What?" he said, the word more a puff of air than a question. "I said," I repeated, my voice dropping to a quieter, more deliberate tone, "there is one exception. One of you will not be receiving a trust fund." The confusion around the table was palpable. Michael and Carol looked at each other, then at their daughters as if doing a quick, panicked head count. Sarah's face was a mask of bewildered distress. "Dad, what are you talking about? An exception? Why?" I kept my eyes locked on Jake. His face was now pale, the blood draining away to leave a waxy, shocked mask. The red flush of embarrassment was starting to creep up his neck. "Because," I said, each word falling like a stone, "because one of you recently showed me in no uncertain terms that they value money more than family. That they see this family not as a source of love and support, but as a source of funding. And that kind of betrayal, that profound lack of loyalty, does not deserve a reward." The room erupted in a chorus of gasps and murmured questions. "What is he talking about? Who? Betrayal?" Jake's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. The trap had been sprung, and he was caught squarely in the middle of it. "Grandpa," he finally stammered, his voice unnaturally high. What are you talking about? This is crazy! What betrayal?" I tilted my head slightly, maintaining a calm, almost pitying expression. Inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pain and righteous anger. This was the moment. This was the surgical incision. "The bank called me, Jake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. "They always call." For a second, there was only confusion on the faces of the others. The bank? What did the bank have to do with anything? But I saw the exact instant the meaning of my words hit Jake. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. His face crumpled. The last vestiges of color fled his cheeks. His eyes, wide with shock, darted toward his mother, then back to me, pleading, desperate. He looked like a cornered animal. I don't know what you mean," he whispered, but the lie was pathetic, transparent. There was no fight in him, only the panic of being caught. "Don't you?" I asked, my tone gentle, almost conversational. "It was about my online banking.
Someone's been trying to access my account. They used the username I have written down in my study. The study you so kindly helped me clean last week. The puzzle pieces clicked into place for everyone else. I saw the dawning horror on Sarah's face. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears of shame and disbelief. She looked at her son, and the look was one of utter devastation. Michael's expression hardened into grim understanding. Carol put a protective arm around her daughters. The silence was no longer anticipatory. It was horrified, thick with the awful truth. There were no more questions. My statement and Jake's reaction had provided all the answers they needed. Jake stared at me, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The entitled young man was gone, replaced by a humiliated boy. The public shaming was complete. I had not shouted. I had not called him a thief. I had simply stated two facts and let the family and his own conscience connect the dots. The judgment in the room was a tangible force, and it was crushing him. He pushed his chair back from the table, the legs screeching against the hardwood floor. The sound was jarring, a violent punctuation to the quiet drama. You old, he choked out, but he couldn't even form the insult. His face was a twisted mask of rage and humiliation. He looked around the table, at the faces of his family, faces that were no longer confused or sympathetic, but horrified, disappointed, disgusted. He had nowhere to hide. With a strangled sound, he turned and stormed out of the dining room. We heard the front door open, then slam shut with a force that shook the entire house. The sound echoed away, leaving a void of silence more deafening than the slam itself. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. We were a frozen tableau of familial collapse. Then, Sarah buried her face in her hands and began to sob, deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. The sound broke the spell. Carol immediately went to her, putting an arm around her shoulders. Michael stood up, his face a storm cloud. "Oh, kill him," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "No, Michael," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me feeling ancient and hollow. "It's done." "But, Dad," Sarah looked up, her face streaked with tears. "How could he? How could he do that?" "That's a question only he can answer," I said. I looked at my granddaughters who were watching the scene with wide, frightened eyes. I felt a pang of regret that they had to witness this. But perhaps it was for the best. Perhaps they needed to see the consequence, too. The rest of the evening was a somber affair. The joy had been leached from the room, replaced by a heavy pall of shock and sadness. We tried to talk, to salvage something from the wreckage, but the conversation was stilted, forced. Everyone was processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. The family dynamic had been irrevocably altered. When they left, the goodbyes were quiet, accompanied by hugs that were a little tighter, a little longer than usual. Sarah clung to me. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, sweetheart. It's not your fault." But as I closed the door behind them and was alone again in the silent, lemon-scented house, I wondered if that was true. Had my leniency, my desire to help, somehow created this monster? Had I, in trying to be a good grandfather, failed to be a good disciplinarian? The question swirled in the emptiness. I walked back into the dining room. The table was still littered with the remnants of the dinner,
a cheerful scene now rendered tragic. I picked up Jake's coffee cup. It was still half full. I carried it to the kitchen and poured the cold liquid down the sink. It felt symbolic. I was washing away the poison. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, in the dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the window. The revenge, the lesson had been executed perfectly. It had been cathartic, satisfying. So why did I feel so empty? Why did the victory taste like ashes?
Because it wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. I had wanted to teach Jake a lesson about loyalty, but the method had required me to weaponize the family itself. I had used our Sunday dinner, Eleanor's tradition, as a battlefield. I had exposed a cancer, but the surgery had been brutal, and the patient, the family, was left bleeding. The phone rang around midnight. I knew who it would be. I let it go to the answering machine. After the beep, Jake's voice filled the room, slurred and angry. "How could you do that to me? In front of everyone. You humiliated me. I'm your grandson. You owe me." I listened to the rage, the entitlement still burning bright even in his humiliation. There was no remorse, no apology, only a sense of wounded privilege. I picked up the receiver and placed it back in the cradle, cutting off the diatribe. The lesson, it seemed, was not yet learned. The consequences were just beginning. The weeks that followed the dinner were a study in fallout. The initial shock waves subsided, but the aftershocks were constant, subtle tremors that rearranged the emotional landscape of our family. Jake, true to form, did not handle his exile with grace. He didn't come crawling back with an apology. Instead, he doubled down. He called Sarah incessantly, not to express remorse, but to paint himself as the victim. I was a senile old man, he claimed. I had misunderstood a simple mistake. I was paranoid, holding a grudge over a few unpaid loans. He tried to drive a wedge between Sarah and me, a tactic that caused her immense pain. She was trapped between her father and her son, her loyalties tyrannisant. There were tearful phone calls to me, where she'd vacillate between defending him, "He's just lost, Dad, he's angry," and expressing her own deep hurt. It was excruciating to witness. The rest of the family, however, surprised me. Michael, after his initial rage, became my staunchest ally. He saw Jake's actions for what they were, a fundamental character flaw. He and Carol sat down with their daughters and had a long, serious talk about honesty, hard work, and the meaning of the trust fund I'd set up for them. They told me the girls seemed to understand the gravity of it all in a way they hadn't before. The money was no longer an abstract future gift. It was a symbol of earned trust. My other granddaughter, Lisa's daughter that was away at college, called me after hearing the news from her mother. "Grandpa," she said, her voice clear and steady over the phone, "I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's just awful. But thank you for everything." The gratitude in her voice was genuine, untainted by the drama. It was a balm on my wounded spirit. The most significant change, however, was in the family gatherings. Jake was conspicuously absent. The first few Sundays without him was strained, the empty chair at the table a silent, accusing presence. But slowly, something shifted. Without Jake's disruptive energy, without the underlying tension of his constant requests and the family's collective anxiety about his next misstep,
The atmosphere lightened. Conversations became more genuine. Laughter returned, easier and more frequent. My granddaughters seemed more open, more present. They asked me questions about my life, about Eleanor, about the business. There was a newfound respect, a sense of value for the family bond that had been taken for granted before. It was during one of these quieter dinners, about 2 months after the announcement, that Sarah finally broke down. The conversation had turned to future plans, and Michael was talking about helping his eldest daughter visit college campuses. Jake was supposed to go to college, Sarah said suddenly, her voice thick. She put her fork down. He was so smart. He could have done anything. The table went quiet. We all looked at her. The pain on her face was raw. "I know, sweetheart," I said softly. "I failed him," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "After his father left, I think I tried too hard to make it up to him. I never said no. I let him get away with everything. I created this."
I got up from my chair and went to her, putting my hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me," I said, my voice firm. "You are a wonderful mother. You raised a boy on your own, and you did it with love and strength. Jake is a man now. He makes his own choices. You did not force him to sneak into my study. You did not force him to try and steal from me. That was his decision, his character, not your failure." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for the truth. I held her gaze, letting her see my conviction. It was a crucial moment. For weeks, Jake's narrative had been worming its way into her mind, convincing her that she and I were to blame for his actions. It was time to reclaim the truth. Michael chimed in. "He's right, Sarah. Jake's always been a taker. Remember when he borrowed my power tools and sold them? Or when he crashed Carol's car and lied about how it happened? This isn't new. This is who he is." Hearing it from her brother seemed to finally break through the wall of guilt Jake had built around her. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. I know. It's just hard to accept." "It is hard," I agreed. "But we accept it together, as a family. This isn't about punishing him forever. It's about protecting what we have left. It's about making sure his choices don't poison the well for everyone else." That dinner marked a turning point. The family began to heal, the wound slowly closing, leaving a scar, but no longer an open sore. We had faced the betrayal, and, in a strange way, it had made us stronger. The loyalty that remained was more conscious, more appreciated. It was no longer a given. It was a choice we actively made for each other. As for Jake, he became a ghost at the periphery of our lives. I heard snippets from Sarah. He'd moved in with some friends. He'd lost a job. He was always talking about a big break that never materialized. There were no more phone calls to me. The silence from him was absolute. I didn't know if he felt any genuine remorse or if he was just nursing his wounded pride. I suspected the latter.
One crisp autumn afternoon, I was raking leaves in the yard. The air was clean and cool, the sky a brilliant blue. It was a good day. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I saw a car I didn't recognize slow down as it passed the house. It stopped a little way down the street, then reversed until it was idling by my curb. The passenger window rolled down. It was Jake. He looked older, thinner. The boyish charm had been replaced by a pinched, sullen look. He didn't get out of the car. We just looked at each other across the expanse of my manicured lawn, the fallen leaves a tapestry of red and gold between us. The distance felt immense, more than just physical. I didn't move. I leaned on my rake and waited. This was his move. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, then closed it again. His eyes, even from this distance, held a complex mixture of emotions. Anger, yes, but also a flicker of shame and something else, a dawning, bleak understanding. He saw me not as a resource to be tapped, but as a man who had drawn a line in the sand and held it. He gave a short, sharp nod, almost imperceptible. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation. It was an acknowledgement of the line, an acknowledgement of the consequence. Then he rolled up the window. The car drove away, and I watched it disappear around the corner. I stood there for a long time, the rake heavy in my hands. The encounter had been brief and wordless, but it felt more significant than any shouting match could have been. It was the end of the story, the final period on the sentence I had handed down at the dinner table. I went back into my study. The lemon polish and old paper scent greeted me, familiar and comforting. I sat at my mahogany desk and looked at the photographs. The one of Jake and me at his graduation was still there. I didn't put it away. To remove it would be to pretend the past didn't happen, to erase the pain and the lesson. I preferred to remember the good and the bad.
I opened the top drawer and took out a copy of my new will, locked away in a separate folder. It was just paper, legal language, but it represented something more. It was my final word on the matter. A document that said, "This is what I built. This is who I value. This is the price of betrayal." Family means loyalty. It means showing up. It means respecting the foundations that others have built for you. Jake chose greed. He chose the easy path, the shortcut. And his punishment is not that he won't get a check after I die. His punishment is that he has to live with the knowledge of what he did. He has to live with the silence where his family used to be. He has to navigate the world alone, without the safety net of unconditional support that he so carelessly severed. He will live with the consequences long after I'm gone. And as I sit here in the quiet of my study, the solid wood of the desk beneath my hands, I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, that the lesson has been learned. It was a harsh lesson, for him and for me. But it was a necessary one, for the family, for the legacy, for the principle that some things, like trust, like loyalty, are simply not for sale.